Just a quick announcement with respect to some breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. We heard some breaking news earlier, but Pace Now has shared with me that the wires are indicating that Ann Arbor just sold over a $500,000 bond for projects ranging in size from $16,000 to $245,000. The Ann Arbor State Bank bought the 10-year bond at 4.75%. And the projects range from a Bob's Big Boy, one of my favorites, to a community housing project. So things are happening, ladies and gentlemen. And for those of you that want to make sure that you have access to all the information that we have been given throughout the course of this conference, do know that it will be posted in several weeks on the lapace.org website. But in addition, you will all get an email when that is available indicating this is where you can go to get all the PowerPoints as well as the video. Some of you may not have known that you were being videoed, okay? So be on your best behavior, at least at this point, all right? So, our last panel on the commercial pace is a pretty straightforward one. How do we get these deals done? And these people have been getting these deals done, and certainly no more so than Sonoma County. So we're pleased to start with Jane Elias. Jane?
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, everybody. And happy to be here talking about how to get across the finish line. One of the things I wanted to start off and share with you and talking about local resilience and some of the foundations of the countywide goals and resilience is, in a few short days, our program, the Energy Independence Program, is going to be 4 years old. So we're happy to be celebrating that birthday this month and thrilled to be here and share it with everybody as well. So the foundation of countywide goals, it was something that was extremely important and critical in starting this program and providing that local generation and the local jobs. Ultimately, although to decrease the emissions within the county, we had put together some very stringent countywide goals to try and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions 25% 1990 levels by 2015. And in doing so, one of those tools to get that done was looking at the existing building stock and creating PACE program within the county to try and get some of that work done. When a program was put together, it incorporated both residential and commercial, and there were a lot of hiccups along the way. It was something pretty brand new at that point in time, and Liz is here. She can certainly attest that there were many headaches and questions and everything to try and figure out, both on the commercial and residential side. But in doing so, in that first year and working out a lot of those things and figuring out a lot of all the processes and what's going to happen and how do we work through this, then after about a year or so, about 2011, we started looking at how can we expand it. You know, we've kind of got this PACE thing figured out. We're working along. We've got some projects going. We've funded some. How can we expand the program to be able to bring more property owners into it, to involve the community, to let them know what's happening. We had some projects on the books now, and to be able to educate the public about all of this. And when we opened the program, we had a storefront, and we also created a website portal. Fortunately, with some grant money that we received from the California Energy Commission in 2011-2012, we were able to go ahead and expand some of these features and create and enhance that website portal. So in doing so, we've got the calendars, news, information. We created an action plan tool for property owners to go ahead and sign up and start listing their projects, and then to try and track their projects throughout and see what kind of work they're getting done and be able to look at the numbers of what's happening. Education and outreach is big. That's one of the, in talking about getting across the finish line, one of the things that we're able to offer as a local government. You know, we talked about yesterday a little bit of the different types, the JPAs, the standalones, or the public financing, funding, which is what our program offers. is we're able to go ahead and get out there into the public through the education and outreach efforts. And we do probably a little over 3 dozen of those a year at least. Tabling events, presentations, speaking opportunities to just try and get the word out about PACE. Much like we're here today talking about it, we try and do it regionally, statewide, nationwide, etc. And let people know that this is a tool in the bag to be able to use. Rebate and incentive programs. One of the things when we looked at enhancing our program is what else can we offer? You know, we've got the storefront, we've got inquiries, emails, we launched social media. What can we offer to people to be able to get these projects done as fast as possible, as easy as possible? And we wanted to be able to let them know all of the possible rebate and incentives that they might be able to access, the tax credits. In working with the public, we also realized that the contractors were incredibly important. That became very apparent early on that they were really our feet on the street as far as getting this word out. And we wanted to be able to try and give them some resources to get out there and do some of this work for us, that we couldn't necessarily fund all of that kind of marketing and outreach. So with that, we looked at the resources we could offer them and partnered up with the Workforce Investment Board in Sonoma County and created a tool lending library, because we realized that while they're out there doing this work, and there was all these green grants going on through the Workforce Investment Board to retrain and get them out there doing energy audits and what have you, it was also incredibly expensive for them to buy some of these tools. So we were able to offer a tool lending library for them to come and borrow those tools for free. We also implemented a monthly contractor forum that we could go ahead and then disseminate some of this information, get their feedback, and work through some of these processes and learn how we could better our process to help them out, as well as some continuing education for them and bringing in some workforce education and local workshops so they didn't have to travel out of county to go and get that kind of training. In addition to that, we also, we've got our financing marketplace. We've got the PACE through the county treasury. And looking, we've got a $60 million bucket of money there that we can use, but also what else might we be able to bring in, and what could people look at doing if PACE doesn't work for them through the county treasury? Would it possibly be another PACE provider? Could we do something like a private partner public relationship, much like we did with the Clean Fund project, working through some of those issues and being able to offer it. And then looking at some other on-bill financing, working with some of the cities and towns, and have all of this resource there so that depending upon who came through the door or called us, we would be able to then go ahead and offer this to them, work through what was they needed in order to get their project done. Partnerships, incredibly important. Some of the partnerships we're currently working with right now in the immediate is our Energy Watch program. Through the Energy and Sustainability Division in the county, Energy Watch is one of those sister programs, and with the offerings that they have through the commercial and their contractors that they work with to be able to offer some of those free lighting retrofits or energy assessments, HVAC retrocommissioning, dovetails in really nicely with the commercial projects or customers that we have coming in interested in getting some of this work done. And so if that can work, we'll partner that, get them connected up with Energy Watch. They also have that relationship with the local utilities and some of the funding stream to come through from the local utilities that we're able to then access and get some additional marketing, education, outreach going. We work very closely with the Regional Climate Protection Authority. Many of the projects that they do and the programs that they're involved in, they do incorporate all 9 cities within the county. So we look at trying to leverage their resources along with our resources. They're also closely tied to the Energy Upgrade California Whole House program and the multifamily program that's going to be coming on board. So, and that's just to name a few. We have literally a number of partnerships and collaborations that go off the page. But to get to the numbers, why we cross, how do we cross the finish line? And I want to speak specifically to the commercial projects. Since I'm sure everybody's really curious about this, 58 funded commercial projects to date. totaling about 10.7 million. And did we do that alone? Did we get it across the finish line alone? Absolutely not. It took a lot of hard work, a lot of those partnerships I just talked about, the contractors, working with county council and bond council and figuring out how can we get this done. And really our job as a government, and I know this, to try and keep it simple. I know that's a bit of an oxymoron, but one of the things we strive with the program is to try and keep it simple. When we set this up, we tried to standardize and create some very, the terms, the processes by which that infrastructure and framework so that people can work with and get access to it, to learn about it, and then it would be pretty streamlined across the board, and we wouldn't have to change it up too much for each one coming through the door. And that's really been one of our major focuses, is that streamlining and providing that framework. And then, so these 58 projects, they're averaging about $185,000. They range anywhere from as little as $9,000 up to our largest project of $2.3 million funded. And you can see solar is obviously a big component. Out of those 58 funded projects, 45 have either been strictly solar or incorporated some aspect of solar, totaling 2.1 megawatts of generation. This screen may be a little bit difficult to read, but one of the things I wanted to share with you is what types of projects have we funded? Anywhere from, Simon Mall, the shopping mall, large commercial building like that, down to your smaller retail, your single proprietary, to medical offices, veterinarians, a golf course, some storage facilities, restaurants, wineries, obviously a pretty big one. And given the makeup of our county and what it looks like, very vastly different from Los Angeles here and some of the others throughout the state, we have a large agricultural aspect. But one of the things that we do have, and it's pretty rural. I think, as far as downtown Santa Rosa, I want to say the largest building is probably 7 stories high. So very different from your Los Angeles or your Sacramento or your San Francisco. But we do incorporate a lot of different aspects of the commercial, as well as multifamily. So I wanted to point this out and let everybody know that, it's not just one single type of commercial business. It's a lot of different types, and it can work anywhere. To talk about the different types of improvements, obviously, like I had mentioned, PV is one of them, but we do have a lot of cool roofs, a lot of windows, doors. We've got solar thermal has actually been a fairly popular one as well, and HVAC. So I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a breakdown of the percentages of what types of improvements are being financed, and answer any questions about those later. A little bit about, talking the framework and the structure, who's eligible. So we went through and created the criteria of who could, participate in the PACE financing. And I think this is all pretty familiar to most people, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But one of the things I did want to point out with commercial, the lender acknowledgement, that is something that we do require. And out of the 58 properties, 1/3 of them had no mortgages or no lien. But those 2/3 that we do have that have gone through, the lender acknowledgement was received, and we've involved 23 unique lenders. And it was mentioned yesterday, a lot of groundwork was done, that political will, the networking with the local banks, local credit unions, but also then with the larger lenders. So these 23 unique lenders do involve some of those local credit unions and what have you, but they also involve, your Union Bank of California, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. So there are some big players in there. The underwriting criteria. We spent a lot of time looking at, how can we, and everybody pretty much has to, meet this underwriting criteria in order for you to participate with the PACE financing. And this is all pretty standard, I think, with most programs or financing options that are out there at this point. We do have the one thing with our program, both commercial and residential, is 7% simple interest. It's been like that since the beginning of the program. It's continuing to stay 7%. We do have the less than 100% lien to value ratio. And of course, the no bankruptcies and current on property taxes, current on all liens and mortgages, and all of that's pretty standard. And then the financing, we do allow that is based on the market value, and you can finance up to 10% of the property, or pardon me, 10% of the market value. With commercial, there is that one exception that if you have no existing mortgage or lien, you can then possibly finance up to 50% of the market value, but we treat that on a case-by-case basis. So a little bit about our financing warehouse and how it works. We have the $60 million pool. It's $45 million from the Treasury, and then we've got $15 million from the Water Agency. And we've got that $60 million, and you saw on the slide a couple back there that we have financed about $60 million worth of projects already between residential and commercial. But in property owners already making some of their principal payments, as well as on the residential side, a number of those property owners that have participated in the refinancing or transfer of sale have been forced to pay off a number of their assessments. So that's freed up a good deal of monies there, about $11, $12 million. So we still have a fair amount left, but we are continuing to research and try and figure out how we can make this sustainable, keep this going. You know, is it always going to be from our Treasury pool here? Most likely not. So one of the things we're looking at with those other financing options is how can we possibly bring other PACE financing into the county? How can we keep this as one of those tools for property owners to be able to access in order to get the projects done? Because that's really all about what we're interested in, is how do we get this retrofit work done to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions? So then we created the financing authority. It goes through the energy independence program, and all pretty standard. The only diversion to there is kind of that investor and open market financing, which Derek will speak a little bit to with Clean Fund and one of those projects that we did between that public and private partnership. Challenges and opportunities. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this. This is something that is, we're always looking at where are the opportunities? How can we make this more innovative? What can we bring in? And I wanted to talk, case studies. One of the things mentioned is we need to get better on our case studies. I do have one that we'll go over here a little bit, but that's one of my challenges here, is to try and figure out a better way to get those case studies. With one of our recent creative campaigns, our marketing campaigns that we put out, we've got a whole new testimonial aspect to it and video for some of those property owners that have participated. So, but it's getting that message out, I think, as we all know. It's finding and accessing those property owners. That's one of the really difficult things with commercial that we found, is getting to that property owner. There's a lot of tenants involved in everything, but if you can actually resource and get to the property owner and bend their ear a little bit about how PACE could work for them. The return on investment stories, as well as the further acceptance by the banks and lenders, and keeping those long-term financing options available. So quickly, just a little bit of case study. This is Dry Creek Vineyard in Sonoma County. They went through in October of 2012. They have 200 acres of estate-owned vineyards, fairly good size. As you can see, beautiful setting, older buildings, located in the Dry Creek Valley of Sonoma County, one of the Appalachians, and you can see it's absolutely beautiful. And there are a number of, I think, 12 different appellations throughout the county. So I showed this slide just to have everybody be aware that there's a lot of open space. There's a lot of valleys and hillsides that are full of vineyards. You don't see a whole lot of buildings throughout here, and it's a rural and agricultural community with a lot of wineries and a lot of dairies and cheese factories. Their project involved solar mainly, and then they did go ahead and institute at the same time an electric vehicle charging station. So they went ahead and they put up a number of solar panels on one of their building facilities here. And a little bit of the details is it was 260 solar panels up there on the building for a total of an 80 kW system with one inverter. Union Bank was the bank, their lender, that was involved, that we got the lender acknowledgement from. And with this project, they financed just under $400,000 to get this done. They were able to go ahead and receive a federal cash grant that was available at the time, so they were looking at about $118,000 back in the cash grant. And then with the PG&E's monthly rebate, the PBI, performance-based incentive, they were looking at about an average of $451 a month over 5 years, so $27,000. So this made sense. You know, I was speaking with George, I think it was yesterday, and talking about, you know, some businesses keeping up with the Joneses and how do you get this through. And the wineries do a lot of the keeping up with the Joneses of who can put on solar. And as you travel through the county, you'll notice there is a lot of it. So, but it made sense for Dry Creek Vineyard to go ahead and do this. And since this was done just a few months ago, one of the things we're looking at doing is following up with them, get a year's worth of their bills. You know, I did speak with the facilities manager there, and it has reduced their electrical bill dramatically at this point. We've been going through the winter months, and we're really anticipating and looking forward to seeing what their summer bills are going to be looking like when they really get the production going. So here's a few of their details. This actually comes off of their website. They're pretty proud about the fact that they do go ahead and offer some sustainability features, and that they did go ahead and institute solar. So I think there's even the part there about, at the bottom, a quote from them about how it really does take a village to get it done. We're happy to be a part of that village to get this project finished. Talking about the infrastructure, the framework, one of the things that we were able to do with that California Energy Commission grant in 2011-2012 was to create this replication toolkit, you know, how to start your own pace. And it was an excellent opportunity for us at the time because the program started in 2009 and it took off like wildfire, and everybody was running around trying to get these things done and figure out all the processes and everything. This project allowed us to slow down, take a good look at what did we do, and document it all and put it all down, and then we share that resource, lessons learned. We did a whole series of webinars, of commercial webinars, and we have all of that available on our website. We also provide all of the documents that we put together, the lender acknowledgement form, our application, everything is there. So, and we are also really happy to answer any questions. We get field calls weekly and email inquiries from all over the nation to answer questions of how we did it, why we did it, how we're going to continue it, and get these projects across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Now we'll hear from Derek Brown, Managing Partner of Project Sourcing Clean Fund.
Thanks. Let's see, so is that going to work? Oops. Aha, here we go. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Sonoma Mountain Village project up in Sonoma County. And this was the first privately financed commercial PACE project completed. So there were a few arrows on this one. So you know, what I do is I just work on getting things, A, to the starting line, B, through the process, and C, across the finish line. So I just ran the numbers last night, and I've gotten to the starting line now with over 110 projects, and I've gotten to the finish line with 3. And you know, most projects, when they go off the rails typically early in the sales process. I guess I'm thinking this is a continuum. There's a sales process, and there's a PACE execution process, and there's no dividing line between the two. So it's kind of this whole thing, and I think focusing on that entire spectrum is useful for everyone. But again, I think we're going to do more of a dive onto the process here. So I should say, of those 3. We'll go into this one. One of them involved creating a PACE program where there was none. And the third, which project, the Prologis project, Rich is going to dive into. That one had its own, I mean, everything's unique, and that one was particularly unique. And that one we were able, fortunately, to play a fairly background role. So my quick tour here is just the dive on the project, with, of course, some additional comments thrown in to spice things up and keep people sitting nervously on the edges of their seats. So back in August 2010, how many of us were slaving away on PACE in August of 2010? Yeah, there's still a few veterans, still standing, going forward. Remember what that was like. The world had just almost come to an end as we had known it in July. But Sonoma County, of course, is there, that shining light on the hill, still going ahead with the commercial program up and running. We also had LA and San Francisco quickly regrouping around basically designing commercial PACE programs. Kind of, if you did a rethink on PACE for commercial, how would you do it? And LA and San Francisco were just sort of beginning in the early stages of that process. Up in Sonoma, this large property owner, Codding Enterprises, had a $5 million megawatt solar system project already defined. So in terms of that big project process, these guys were, they'd engineered it, they decided to go ahead with it. They'd already essentially pre-qualified this for participation in the Skype program. But it hit the hitch of the lender declining to provide consent. And so that was the situation in August of 2010. So along comes Clean Fund. Of course, we were banking on all these PACE programs across the country to turn on that summer and fall, and we were ready to rock and roll funding commercial projects. Suddenly all that went away, and we're kind of sitting there spinning our wheels, and we saw this project in Sonoma, and we said, aha, let's go to Skype, because we knew open market was coming with San Francisco and LA, and basically said, look, if we can get this project over the finish line, will you let us fund it? In a sense, will you do a beta test of open market PACE? And the Skype response was, yeah, why not? We'll figure out how to allocate costs so that this project bears its fair share of program costs. But we see where private capital providers can do things that we, both as a program and as a financing source, can't do. So there's a distinction that's worth focusing on here. There's PACE programs, and there's PACE financing. In some cases, as in Sonoma, those two functions were under one roof. And there are some other program models where those two functions are under one roof. The open market model is sort of an explicit separation of those two. You've got the program being run by one entity, and you've got financing being provided by other entities. And actually, I want to quickly just correct a misstatement yesterday about open market programs not being able to be fully funded, or not being able to be described as fully funded. Well, I mean, you're basically saying that a financing source can't, you have a financing source, and Sonoma County has certainly been fully funding their program, and they've added yet other funding opportunities, so that one is now multiply fully funded. I think any financing, it'll spin back again too. I think Sonoma's model comes from the residential PACE world, and that is a case where I think it makes more sense to combine program and financing together, and in fact, sole source financing, because it's so inextricably linked to the program. You have to do this programmatically. So I think you've got an argument there that a financing monopoly is more appropriate. In the commercial world, show me one commercial property owner that wants less choice rather than more, less competition rather than more. These guys don't need to be handed, here's your deal, take it. That's not the way they work. I mean, yeah, there's a little brain damage you got to figure out. There's multiple capital providers and who they are and how do they stack up. Look, these guys can handle. There might be a gripe or two, but this is something they do day in and day out across their entire business spectrum. So, yeah, the open market pace in commercial, I think, is just a recognition of the fact that commercial projects, there is such a vast range of types and properties and structures and industries they're in that, I mean, we're an ambitious capital provider, and we're only going to address a fraction of that spectrum. So, I think in the commercial world, the more of us that are in there figuring out the specialties, figuring out value adds, the more fully funded these programs are going to be. Anyways, how is that for a digression? Back to the project. So this was the test drive of open market pace. And one of the things we had to figure out was, who does what? Because, yeah, the programs before, oops, back up. Okay, there we go. Yeah, how do you fit in a capital provider that isn't integrated into the program? So that was just one of the things that we had to work through between the roles of the project developer, the property owner, the mortgage lender, the program, the tax collector, and this new entity, a independent capital provider. So this project, if we roll back to the setting in August 2010, this one had run up on the rocks of lender consent. And so that was our specific mission. Well, we had to do two things. One was work with Sonoma on how to modify their program to permit a private capital provider to work within it and under what terms. And again, they were very helpful. This took a lot of work. I mean, nobody had done this before. So there was a lot of figuring out how to sell a bond, privately place a bond externally, what those documents were, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a lot of work to do modifying the program. And that's something else for people to consider. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of projects, a lot of the work we're doing on projects in the pipeline involve tweaks to existing programs. These programs have been designed basically with best guesses and a lot of thought, but as we confront the realities of what we're doing, yeah, we need, tweaks along the way. And again, we're kind of all in this learning together. So, this aspect of that project is not atypical. So what we focused on externally was working with both the customer and with the lender to come up with a structure that met both of their needs and concerns. And quite frankly, we did this because for us, this was part of a broader investment in PACE nationally. If we were just somebody local only looking at Sonoma County, it would have made 0 sense to put this sort of effort in. And I think, by Sonoma viewing itself as part of the larger PACE ecosystem and opening up to it, recognizing that their program is not a standalone island. It is part of a global capital markets, project vendors that are global in scope, banking institutions that are global in scope, that you've got to be looking beyond your own city and county border, and what's this broader world? How can you leverage people that are working within it? And one of the things here was, we were motivated to work on this and put in the effort because we were looking at that broader world. But this really just took a lot of back and forth between the owner and the lender. The lender was a large national bank with, I lost count of how many departments we had to go through. It was really a process of educating the lender, helping them make a decision internally. And it was a lot of work with a lot of people. But again, it's an iterative thing with the property owner. So that was the work we were doing, working with the program and working with the property owner and the lender. And ultimately, the big finish line checkboxes was the modification to the program, obtaining lender acknowledgement, and again, we ran lots of massive analysis to help the lender through it. Ultimately, it boiled down to one key, for this project, in this situation, one key thing that sized the deal. And that was that the system production value be greater than the PACE assessment in all years before taxes and incentives. So that's what sized this project. So it was a $5 million system. The PACE financing ended up being $1.6 million, 7% interest rate, 20-year term. But that's how this iterated. And the owner was able to, between the federal incentives and other capital, provide the balance of the financing. So remember the start date on this one, August 2010. Note the finish date. These take a long time. These first deals are the most painful, but I think Prologis was 6-month cycle. Note the trend, but the first ones are going to be the most painful, and this took a lot of people from Clean Fund to make happen. But these early ones, I think that they teach us all something. That the pain in doing them is greater than what's going to be forward. But be glad to answer any questions about this or any of the other 109. But thank you.
Thank you, Derek. And now we turn to Rich Chen to tell us what's happening in San Francisco in that particularly exciting project that you're so involved with.
Good morning, everyone. It's been mentioned a few times over the last couple of days, and now I'm going to divulge all the details of the famed Prologis project and talk a little bit about the San Francisco program, a little bit of background of why certain ways that we have done things in San Francisco helped get this one across the finish line, go into the projects, and kind of end with a little bit of takeaways from my experience working on this. So we use the Mello-Roos Act as our underlying framework for our PACE program, and it was gone into pretty detailed yesterday as to Mello-Roos SB 555 versus AB 811. We are a conduit issuer to private lenders who purchase bonds to finance the projects, and we can flexibly remit payments back to them either through the property tax system or we can hand bill. We did develop our program with ARA funding that both paid for the upfront cost of setting up our program, and we also have a grant from the California Energy Commission to provide a debt service reserve fund that could enhance the financing. If there's a need for a reserve fund, it can be capitalized through this grant. And we've identified potentially some other uses for those funds to help stimulate interest and activity for our commercial PACE program. So we're looking at potentially offering an interest rate buy down or covering other project-related costs to enhance and get folks, early adopters, rewarded for investigating using our program. And we did a great deal of outreach both with the private sector actors who could potentially be involved in projects and transaction, as well as the folks at the bottom there work closely with Renewable Funding and Dave Hodgins and Los Angeles and Sonoma and Placer to work through how to develop this particular approach. So just noting a few of the features that I think are unique and helpful, at least in what we're doing now and how we're able to do this Prologis project, is ultimately it's flexible. So the open market model's also been discussed at length, but essentially we allow sophisticated investors to purchase bonds for qualified projects in our program. So again, as Derek and others have mentioned, it could be a specific capital provider wanting to focus on a particular property type or project size, or looking at doing certain types of improvements. So there could be some niches developed for both vendors and capital providers through the structure. The financing terms are customized based on that relationship between that particular capital provider and the property owner. Because we're a Mellow Roofs program, we can do publicly owned properties, which was helpful in the Prologis project. Leasehold interest can also serve as a security along the same lines. And we were able to leverage other financing tools such as the QECB, which I'll talk about, and also mentioned we could eventually offer this financing to new developments because of our underlying legislation. But we're not focused on that right now. We're exclusively looking at existing buildings and improving the performance of those buildings. So this is a shot of the Pier 1 building. It's 151,000 square feet. AMB first entered into a public-private partnership with the Port of San Francisco back in '99 to take a dilapidated waterfront property, basically double the square footage and turn it into Class A office space. They merged with Prologis and are operating the facility under a 50-year master lease with the Port of San Francisco, actually leasing back about a third of that square footage to the Port of San Francisco. We start getting into the rabbit hole of all the particular issues of this project that had to be navigated. So and the electrical service is provided by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which is a quasi-public utility in San Francisco that provides clean electricity through Hetch Hetchy to serve municipal operations, buildings, the transit system, et cetera. Here's the snapshot on a little bit about the history of the project. We launched in November 2011, and Prologis picked up the phone and gave Johnson Controls a call and said, we want you to help us develop a whole building solution. They had wanted to do solar for a while and had needs to upgrade some of their building systems and sought a single solution to bundle those projects together. So for us, it was about 10 months, and we closed the bond on October 15th, and I think construction is currently set to be complete before Q2 of this year. I think Prologis' motivations were obviously to reduce energy costs. They're Better Buildings Challenge partners. They wanted to do a case study. They had particular needs and desires for their facility. And I think one of the things that's important is to just understand from meeting the property owner where they're coming from is many times they want new things, and this is a way to help them finance improvements to their buildings. So other notable points are, it's the first commercial PACE project, or any PACE project, I believe, to leverage QECB, although I think that other programs have done that. But this is a single transaction that use a QECB. And I think also just demonstrating energy efficiency. We've talked a lot about that, but this has a very big energy efficiency component to it, so that's notable as well. Here's the scope. It's retrocommissioning of the heating and cooling systems, doing repairs and installing new drives and pumps. Did a lighting upgrade, touching or changing out up to 1,500 lighting fixtures, doing LED installations, changing out older lamps with more efficient lamps, doing a lot of daylight harvesting and controls that really help manage the electricity use in that lighting system, and the 200 kilowatts of solar and some other related work, including an accelerated roof replacement that would match the new solar system that was going on, but was excluded from the financing package because the owner determined that there wasn't a good payback associated with that project, so they didn't want to include that. So it was a $1.4 million QECB issued to Clean Fund. the project was designed to align the debt service payments with the energy savings. And can't read all that fine print at the bottom there. It's probably good for you that you can't. But it's a discussion on qualified energy conservation bonds, and just a note on where that played a role in this particular project, because the service to the building was from San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. The customer, therefore, was not a customer of the investor-owned utilities and was therefore ineligible for many rebates and incentives and the solar incentives that would have been available to them had they been customers of PG&E. So they were asking if there were other things that could be brought to the table to reduce the cost of the project to help the owner achieve the sort of economics that they were really seeking. And we vetted a retrocommissioning project that the SFPUC had previously identified and sort of decided that there was too many challenges and relationship issues of using somebody else's retrocommissioning report for the Johnson Controls contract. So at that time, I got guidance from bond counsel that we could apply for an allocation of QECBs through the state to essentially reduce the effective interest rate. We nearly cut it in half through our application of the QECB. It does come with strings. There are certain rules that apply. There are cost of issuance limits and other things. But one of the benefits is that it really set a deadline to close. So because of the timing of where the project was in terms of its development, there was a very strong commitment. Obviously, with JCI and Prologis at the table, we have two very creditworthy counterparties and a sense that this was really going to happen. So the timing was right to apply for allocation. I did so, and we received allocation for $1.4 million in QECBs that, again, effectively cut that interest rate in half. So this is just a snapshot of the performance. I won't go into too much detail here other than to say that it's significant energy savings, about a 32% reduction in energy consumption and 24% reduction in energy costs. And the lion's share of those savings are actually coming from the efficiency projects. So projected utility escalation conservatively at 3.5% per year shows pretty clearly that the cash flow for this project is pretty good over the term of the bond. The value of those energy savings over time obviously will increase as those rates increase, with a net present value of about $350,000 for those energy savings over the term. Another unique thing that was done on this project is notable is that Prologis, as the master tenant with subleases to 5 businesses and the Port of San Francisco, was able to pass through the PACE assessment payments pro rata based on square footage to their tenants. So again, addressing the split incentive issue, they're receiving the benefits of lower energy costs and will also be paying their share. This chart just shows sort of the demand reduction of both the lighting and the solar project. The gray shows the 2011 baseline in the highest use month of July. The reductions from the lighting project are in blue, and then when you add the solar on top, you achieve pretty big peak shaving. So this is the team, and again, emphasizing getting across the finish line. This is a team effort, all hands on deck required. Everyone needs to really want this to happen. It's not easy. There needs to be a lot of due diligence done, particularly for our part, the Port of San Francisco's involvement. The QECB added some complexity, but also brought a lot of benefits, and just got an amazing team of folks that we have on hand to help assist discussing issues, coming to terms, and the financing piece was actually quite straightforward when we got to that point. Everything else was lead time, resolving issues with the Port of San Francisco, resolving issues with the SFPUC. When it came time to move forward with the final scope, Prologis, we assisted them in contacting 3 of our capital providers. 2 of them provided proposals, and it ultimately wasn't rate that determined what Prologis's choice of going with Clean Fund. There were other things in the terms and the flexibility that were negotiated that made them feel comfortable with going with a Clean Fund proposal. So these are my takeaways. I think a lot of this has been touched on over the last day and a half, but having a champion from the property owner side is key. Prologis is making big commitments to reducing energy consumption in all of the facilities, and they wanted to do something at their headquarters, which makes sense. There was some project need, but really a very sophisticated, savvy guy representing Prologis, whose day job is essentially to identify energy efficiency projects, much as George does. And that is really key to sell the project internally within the organization and to be able to keep with it and keep pushing on it. Otherwise, things can fizzle out. City staff can play an important role. We can obviously do the communications piece, provide credibility, and be the trusted partner, hopefully, but we can also help navigate some of those localized policy issues that I mentioned. The program flexibility allowed for some introduction of a couple of unique things, such as doing it on port property, and the QECB also introduced some complexity, but had a lot of benefits. Hand-holding and holding hands, again, it's just, there's a lot of hand-holding. We're all learning this together. A lot of conversations need to be had, but, we also need to just kind of support each other through the process. And I think at this point, I think it's okay to say the concept is great, the tool is fantastic, but whatever else we can bring to the table, accessing incentives, doing credit enhancements, using a QECB should all be on the table as things that we can help to push these things ultimately across the finish line. So with that, thank you very much.
All right, guys, your turn. In the back.
Hi, I'm Janet Purchase, Riverside County, and this question is for Rich. Under your program with SB 555 as your legislative backing, can you go into more detail on how the publicly owned buildings are funded?
Is this on? Okay. Well, the resolutions and the authorization of our program contemplates that we can issue special tax bonds and levy special taxes on both privately owned and publicly owned facilities. So it is basically part of the Mello-Roos framework that enables that to happen. In this case, because Prologis as a private entity wanted to use PACE financing to do these improvements, the port as a landowner in a contractual agreement with Prologis, who acts as the master tenant for the property, the port therefore had to agree to annex the Pier 1 property into the special tax district, and a side agreement needed to be made between Prologis and the port that Prologis would, is ultimately responsible for the financing obligation.
Thanks. This is just a follow-on to that question. So you mentioned that the bond is secured by the leasehold interest, and so does that mean that is there a lien against the port in that circumstance or not?
The lien is against Prologis as the leasehold interest, which is the security for the financing. And we also had to develop specific terms around should the leasehold interest be terminated because of whatever reason, delinquency or default, or any other reason, that for the bondholder, there would be a provision that a successor leasehold interest would need to be identified before that exercising the remedy on Prologis should they have defaulted. Does that answer your question?
There is no
No.
actual lien.
Okay, yeah,
No.
thank you.
Hello, Ben Stapleton, LA County PACE program. Given your experience in closing deals here and the amount of time it took to get these deals closed, what would be your recommendations to make the process more efficient? Looking back, what would you have done to help move that process forward more quickly and decrease that timeline?
I'll just jump in on that. I think, again, for the Prologis project, there were a lot of things that were outside of property owner wants to do an upgrade, use PACE to do it, and gets financing through that mechanism. There was just a lot, they spent a lot of time developing a scope of work that met all of their programmatic requirements, which is what we want. We want an owner to be very thoughtful about thinking about the benefits and other risks associated with implementing a very complicated construction project on their facility that's hopefully going to deliver economic value to them. So there was a lot of thinking and going back and rethinking what scope was appropriate to include. But when we did get the QECB, it actually accelerated everything to, I think, everyone's benefit, because without something to push the team to resolve issues in a timely manner, things can get bogged down, and there's lots of reasons to push it off or not work on it. So that, I think that was actually a big thing that moved the thing across the finish line. And I don't know if you guys had stuff to
Derek,
add.
did you
Well,
want to?
Yeah, anytime you see the word first associated with a project or a transaction, you know you're in for a learning experience. And yeah, these two specific projects had a lot of firsts associated with them. So, let's be honest. I mean, this is these are new programs, new parties, and we're all learning together. So let's just face that and embrace it. I just want to make a distinction here between what Sonoma's doing is Sonoma's doing essentially programmatic finance. They've got a very well-oiled machine that it's kind of a self-help, self-service. You submit this. Here's all this resources. Educate yourself, and submit this package of materials, and this automated process basically kicks in. And the large numbers of deals, and then add in the residential, which are essentially running through the same process. Those commercial transactions, that's kind of a different track. That's small commercial is, in my mind, is akin to residential PACE. You programmatically finance those projects through a self-help mechanism. So, yeah, you kind of have to think about the large projects much differently than the small ones, and you also have to think differently about kind of the process and the frictions much differently, depending upon what kind of program structure you've got. The learnings are the process stage of these. If you're going from the starting line to the finish line, where these things come off the rails is in the sales stage of the process. Before that property owner says, yes, I am going to do this, I'm in it for the whatever ugliness might be in the lender consent discussion, I'm in it. We ask at that point in the process, if they really want to do it, we ask to be engaged on a fee basis, because we're going to be spending a lot of money getting it across, and that tells us that a property owner is committed. Once they get to that stage, you're to the 98th percentile. Then it's just an execution thing. And we have the precedent. We have programs that are very successful. We're using a 100-year-old muni finance mechanism. So we know there's a solid process. But yeah, again, a new program and new participants, there's just going to be learning in that execution of the program phase.
And one clarification too about the self-service process that Derek mentions. We're publicly funded, or we do have the storefront, we've got the store staff, we've got the resources there for people to access. We are not necessarily actively out there engaging individual property owners through our program. That's more of the contractors or some of the other entities involved, but we are there to provide the answers, resources, and some of those other things to help move this along and ease the way. So.
In the back.
Back to Rich again. Has your PACE program done any other projects in publicly owned buildings?
This is our first project for the entire program. But there is interest from some of our local supervisors who represent the district that a lot of the waterfront properties are on. When they heard about this particular project, they're actively working with the port to see if there are other opportunities to do what we did there on other port properties.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Sarah Waters from Sunlight and Power. I wanted to ask Rich, if the PACE program in San Francisco is to throw another wrinkle in, are nonprofits eligible to apply? And then what are the further complications that might arise from that? And I'm talking about, in my case, it would be affordable housing, building partners. I mean, these are folks that we work with on a new construction basis, but we also do retrofit. And then also large church organizations.
Yeah. So when we were developing guidelines and rules for our program, I was on a parallel project working with a CDFI with a very strong interest in energy retrofits for nonprofits that they work with to see if PACE could be brought as an option, potentially with that particular CDFI buying bonds to help their customers, I guess, do some of the stuff that we're trying to do. And obviously there are some pitfalls there. The hammer that makes all of this stuff happen is if you don't pay, then the city's going to foreclose on you, and we don't want to foreclose on a church, and we don't want to foreclose on an affordable housing project, and we certainly don't want to close on a senior center. So, but we did accommodate that.
Were you talking about the public elected official being supportive of PACE? No.
So, we know that it's probably a long shot that this mechanism is going to work in that circumstance, but we wanted to leave it open in case there was a scenario where that particular financial institution wanted to just see if they could use PACE to do a project on a property like that.
Well, I mean, the properties that I'm speaking about are, I know that we're likely to think about nonprofits as less able to pay their bills, but in fact, most of them their credit is spotless. They have many properties, their asset base is very broad. So I'm talking about folks that, have considerable financial wherewithal. So the chances that they are not going to pay their bills are fairly low. So does that still mean that it would be a difficult road?
Well, there's two, the question really has two parts. A, does a property and project qualify to participate in a local PACE program? Okay, yeah, you're in the game, but the second part of that, and I think the more important one, is anybody willing to finance it? Because if you satisfying the first condition without having somebody who's willing to fund it through the PACE mechanism, yeah, you're really nowhere. So yeah, the churches and senior centers pose exactly the problem that Rich mentioned for an investor, is that the ultimate security of PACE is this foreclosure possibility. And so yeah, as investors, we have different considerations and different mechanics and a different analysis approach towards nonprofits where the possibility of foreclosure is something that is remote.
Question?
Hi, is this on? Okay. My question is also for Rich.
Speak up if you would, please.
My question is also for Rich. After this project closed, do you know on the accounting side whether Prologis took this as a liability or whether they are writing it off as an annual expense? And on the flip side of that, after the project, how you think Prologis now would determine the value of the property?
I actually do not know how they're treating that internally. And in terms of the second question had to do with value. We used public information on the assessed value of the property and the leasehold as basically for the value of the property, and I do not know how they're thinking about the increase in value based on this project.
Yeah, this is one of the things we've been reviewing with them. They're treating the different parts of the project differently. So for the solar portion, there's a Prologis entity that's putting that on balance sheet and monetizing the solar incentives, but they haven't determined yet what they're going to do on the energy efficiency side. But yeah.
Let me interject a question of Rich as well, because in your presentation you had a chart that showed a 3.5% annual increase in utility costs. One of the more recent phenomena that those of us both pleased about and concerned about in pricing of energy is natural gas prices have come down considerably, and therefore the competitiveness of energy efficiency is also more on the margin than it was before. How confident are you about the 3.5% increase? And I would ask people in the audience or otherwise to comment on any pushback they're getting as a function of utility prices perhaps not escalating in the same manner as they had previously as a function of natural gas prices.
Hard to know what that effect will ultimately be, but my understanding is that 3.5% is actually pretty conservative, so it may be built into that escalation. But I don't know if anyone else has information.
Well, that's a Johnson Controls project modeling number, and yeah, I pass it. I see in the project models, I see people running. They're using between 3 and 6%, but people are moving towards 3.
Question.
Thank you. First of all, Derek, congratulations on your kill ratio. 3 out of 109 sounds pretty good to me. And Jane, fantastic work up in Sonoma. Thanks for that. My question is on this 7%, and Rich, you ended up at 7% as well. Where did that come from? And Jane, can you sell that to the tax basis as a sort of a profitable maneuver for the taxpayer down the road? Will they end up being cash flow positive at that rate?
So the 7% tax rate, when we put the program together, was 3% of that is going back to pay the Treasury, and then we wanted this to be a self-funded program so that it wasn't the burden on all taxpayers, and to be able to keep it sustainable. So that 4% spread is what's paying for the administration of the program. You know, you've got the labor costs, you've got the marketing, education, outreach, you've got the council, as well as now the FHFA litigation.
Kathy would like to.
Oh, okay. Pardon? Oh, okay. So when we put that interest rate together, that's where we came up with the number. And to be able to keep that sustainable, we've had many people ask if we can lower the interest rate, and we have looked at that. We've looked at all the different aspects. At this point in time, it does not seem feasible because we didn't intend to hold all of these bonds in our Treasury for this long, and in doing so, that's created an interesting predicament as well. And in holding those Treasury bonds, you know, those go out for allocation or new interest rate every 2 years. So we have to look at our program costs over long term and keeping it sustainable, and how are we going to be able to fund that. And you know, it's possible at some point that may be redone. but we do continue to look at it. And then Kathy, you wanted to add something to it as well?
I did. I wanted to point out that at the time we set the 7% rate, we looked at, our auditor controller looked at what was the 10-year average taxable assessment bond selling for, and it was around 7%. And as Jane pointed out, even though our Treasury holds it right now, we always intended to go to the market, and we needed to set a rate that was high enough so that when we went to the market and sold it, the county wouldn't be stuck with an excess interest payment.
Yeah, another comment. I mean, our math works in a much different direction, but ultimately ended up at the capital markets. And the capital markets are ruthlessly efficient. And if there were cheaper money out, I mean, we don't add an interest rate premium. We're sourcing money at 6.93% for the Prologis bond and putting it out at 6.93%. If we can get cheaper money, we'll take it. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, you know, there's commercial PACE bonds are a new asset class for which there is no demonstrated secondary liquidity. And even though the underlying collateral is very secure, there are very few people, or institutions, I should say, out there that are able to buy 20-year fixed income, completely illiquid securities. And so, yeah, we have to pay a massive liquidity premium for capital. That liquidity premium will decline as this, hoping this market matures. But people don't invest on forward hope. And so we have to get the project volume before these things happen. The rates don't decrease in expectation of something happening that may or may not happen. But yeah, the spread off of treasuries will narrow. Keep in mind that treasuries are at all-time lows. So yeah, the math on PACE projects, it's not about the interest rate. It's about the term. And it's about what's your annual payment in order to put in place a project that delivers a certain benefit. It's a cash flow math. And the rate washes out given the power of the term. Yeah, I mean, lower rates would be better, but ultimately, when you're running the numbers, the rate isn't the most sensitive thing. It is a psychologic stumbling block, and if you're looking at that start line to finish line process, you know, where we've been hanging up largely in the sales process is how do we explain 7% money to somebody, you know, when they have mortgage money at 5%. You know, and that's something that we're all learning collectively how to do better, because it's an apples and oranges thing, and as we get better at that, that's a friction that we're overcoming a bit.
And along the same lines, there's also advantages to using PACE. You know, we've talked a lot about keeping it off balance sheet, and so I think property owners are looking at those advantages and rolling all of those considerations in when they determine whether or not they're going to use PACE.
More questions from you guys?
I have, this is Liz from Sonoma, and I actually want to ask a question of the contractors and solar integrators and ESCOs that might be in the room to, for a moment, put aside the lending instrument that we're talking about for your project, and if you could share with us to set the context when you're talking about these kind of projects, how long do they take start to finish anyway, aside from PACE? So if you could, you know, share some numbers, you know, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. I think that would be helpful to as a comparative baseline for those of us that are only involved in PACE.
Any volunteers?
Come on, Russ.
Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, and great question. And along with that, it takes a lot of patience to close these deals, no doubt about it. They don't happen overnight. You know, the Prologis deal was about 10 months from start to finish, starting with a memorandum of understanding that let's look at an opportunity together, where we did some preliminary benchmarking, looking at the utility data and understanding, yeah, there's about 20% savings here. After that memorandum of understanding, you know, going into a project development agreement where we're having to do some energy modeling, we're having to do some auditing and developing some scope. That preliminary stage takes about 2 to 3 months. just to kind of get the information onto the table. And then it takes about another month or so to communicate that information effectively, not just to your sponsor internally into the company, but help your sponsor communicate it up to the C-level executive. And that's where it gets challenging. So there's a lot of back and forth that month can turn into 2 months until you build up enough confidence with the owner that this is a real opportunity. After they figure that it's a real opportunity, then executing in the next phase in that development agreement, which says, okay, there's an opportunity here, now let's finalize the scope in the engineering. And that takes another 2 months as well, because there's some building walks, there's estimates you need to get from subcontractors. After you get all the final numbers on the table, and like Rich and Derek were saying, that it's a real deal, then it took about another, 3 months, 2 to 3 months of getting the financing to where we kind of arrive at the 10-month period. So if there's already a project identified, it's going to go a lot faster. But our approach with these deep energy retrofits is we are designing a project that wasn't there before. That's what adds on time. But I think the projects that are unfunded, kind of ready to go, will go a lot quicker. Hope that answers your question.
Actually, I think the projects that I've worked on that are of the same size are about the same lead time. But my experience is not with PACE financing, it's with bank financing and lease financing, and those deals can take about 2 to 3 months for you've got the bank at the table, and then you're negotiating all of the terms, and everybody's lined up to, do it. In my case, it's been municipal deals, and those can take longer as well because you have to get city approval, and there's other things that happen. But it's about the same, 10 months.
We do solar deals only, ranging in value from a couple $100,000 up to multiples of millions. Sales cycles go anywhere from 5 days, the fastest one we ever did, up to a couple of years for the larger deals. Then we have entitlement. That's anywhere from over-the-counter approval to 6 or 8 months for these projects. But I think the big issue here is that from a critical path analysis point of view, we wouldn't even start doing the PACE analysis until we'd gone through the sales cycle and through the entitlement cycle, and then we would get onto the PACE thing. So if we're talking about another year or something like that beyond that, that would be a real problem, because there's no way to run those things concurrently, at least not in my view from what I've heard over the last couple of days here.
Janine Windeshausen, Placer County. I have a question for Rich. Jane stated how they have a cost recovery mechanism in their interest rate. I'm just wondering if you have a cost recovery mechanism and what that might be, or whether San Francisco has made a commitment to fund this program as a service and is not concerned about cost recovery.
Not really a concern right now, and still kind of running on some ARA funds that are there to help support the administration of the program, mostly a partial covering of my time to not only work on this initiative, but any other things that I might be doing. There were certain things that were waived from other city departments that participated, although city attorneys did charge full freight for their time on this, and that was, included in the overall financing as sort of cost of issuance. So, if there is more deal flow and project volume coming through, we would certainly look to do the cost recovery. But at this point, we're trying to get these things through, and reducing costs where possible is kind of where we're focused right now.
Speaking as a user of PACE programs, and as a capitalist, we don't expect government to offer PACE programs as a service. We expect to pay for them and pay for the services. Obviously you're not allowed to make a profit on collecting taxes. So yeah, it's a very economical collateral creation and collections mechanism. So yeah, then you've got program fees, and so. Obviously, we're all under cost pressure and competitive pressure, at least in open market PACE programs. Programs, because you're I mean, yeah, actually you can have multiple programs running for a given geographic area, and programs then would have to compete on getting the right balance between services and costs, which, again, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. You know, we're all trying to figure out what that right balance is. And you know, I'll be the first to say, yeah, in these early days, we probably need more active programs. But you know, longer term, I think if the programs are successful, they won't need to be as activist down the road, and they can retreat into simply providing a service and a mechanism at a low cost. But again, from the private sector side, yeah, we expect to pay for it. But again, there's a discussion there about, you know, we don't want to pay for things that we don't need or use.
Last question.
My name is Corey with the City of Chula Vista. Kind of a two-part question. The first question for Jane about the electrical vehicle charging station that was included in the case study, and if there was any unique issues with including that type of measure. And then the second question for the whole panel, if that measure has been included in other PACE programs or other areas.
With the Dry Creek Vineyard project, they financed the solar installation, the solar PV. They just happened to do the EV charger at the same time. So that was not on their proposal and bid when they turned it in for the financing. It was just one of those aspects that was able to happen simultaneously, and the solar company involved with the installation of the PV was also involved with putting in the EV charger. However, in our eligible improvements list, we do have over 90 eligible improvements that people can qualify for, you know, apply for financing. Charging stations are on there. If they don't meet those specifications, we always have a custom track, and then they can go ahead and apply using that custom feature, turning in the documentation, and if it's something that our steering committee can go ahead and decide that this does meet the qualifications of AB 811, all of those terms and conditions, then we can go ahead and finance for that.
We talked about doing EV chargers in San Francisco, and they are on our eligible measures list. Had some fun conversations about the fact that it doesn't actually reduce energy use at the building site, but there is obviously a lot of benefits to supporting more electrical vehicles, and I think there's kind of a policy push from City and County of San Francisco to actively support that. So we sort of decided that it met our policy goals, and we do include those in San Francisco.
Yeah, and for the open market programs, answering the second half of the question, assuming it qualifies for the program, is it something that the capital providers are willing to finance? And the answer there is, yeah, I mean, pretty much anything that qualifies under the program is something that we're willing to finance, although the property owner decision to buy has its own set of calculus, as well as the mortgage lender willingness to support. So again, that does vary about what the type of measure is.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the finish line of this particular panel, but let's give it up for these guys. They did a great job for us.